Welcome back to Void of Fears, where the line between nightmares and reality blurs with every story. Our community grows stronger with each brave soul who joins us. We're 8,000 deep now, creeping toward our goal of 10,000 subscribers by year's end. If you dare to continue this journey with us, hit that subscribe button now. Leave your mark with a like. Share your own encounters in the comments below. Now, let's begin today's story. The descent was violent. Our transport vessel shuddered as it tore through the atmosphere of RX-437, the planet that would become my prison. Metal groaned against the strain, and several rivets popped from the ceiling to ping against the floor like deadly hail. My restraints dug into my wrists as turbulence threw us about the cabin. The prisoner next to me vomited, the acrid smell adding to the sensory assault of our plummet toward exile. "Atmospheric entry in progress, brace for landing," announced the emotionless voice of the ship's AI. "Stabilizers at 30% capacity. Emergency protocols engaged." The other prisoners and I exchanged glances, some fearful, others resigned. We were the unwanted, the convicted, the banished. My fingers gripped the edges of my seat until my knuckles whitened. The ship pitched violently to one side, sending loose objects flying across the cabin. Someone screamed as a metal container struck them. My name is Dr. Adrian Mercer. 3 months ago, I was a respected xenobiologist for Nebula Frontier, humanity's leading private space exploration company. I had comfortable quarters on Europa Station, a promising career, and a reputation for methodical research that had earned me access to the most cutting-edge laboratories in the solar system. My specialty was adaptive biology, how organic systems respond to extreme environments. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now the subject of my own field of study. Now I was cargo, human waste being dumped on an uncharted world. The ship rolled again, and the viewport beside me briefly showed the landscape below. Twisted terrain of unfamiliar colours rushing up to meet us. "This is insane," whispered the woman next to me, her face pale beneath the shock of auburn hair. Her name badge identified her as Dr. Eliza Vaughan, another scientist who claimed she'd been falsely accused. Like me. "They can't just leave us here." "They can, and they will," I replied, trying to steady my breathing as the ship bucked again. "Exile is cheaper than incarceration. The Coalition doesn't want to pay for feeding and housing criminals when there are perfectly good, uninhabitable planets to dump us on." The charges against me had been fabrication, sabotage resulting in the deaths of 3 colleagues during a containment breach in Lab 7. I'd been nowhere near the lab when it happened, but security footage had been doctored to show otherwise. My protests fell on deaf ears during a trial that felt predetermined from the start. I still remembered the judge's cold eyes as she read the verdict, the hushed whispers of former colleagues who now viewed me as a murderer. Through the small viewport, I caught my first real glimpse of RX-437. Swirling dark clouds, occasionally split by flashes of purple-green light. No visible land masses from orbit, just darkness and those strange, unnatural flares that pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. Not lightning, something else entirely. "Impact imminent. Secure all personnel," the AI announced, with the same detached tone it might use to announce dinner service. I closed my eyes and braced. The guards had strapped in at the far end of the cabin, their expressions hidden behind polarized helmets. They'd have been told not to fraternize with the cargo. With a bone-jarring impact, the Cerberus hit ground. The lights flickered, plunging us momentarily into darkness before emergency systems engaged. Several prisoners screamed. One man a few seats down began praying loudly in a language I didn't recognize. The hull creaked ominously, the sound of metal under immense stress. "Exit procedures initiating," announced the AI. Our restraints unlocked simultaneously, with a pneumatic hiss. Guards in heavy environmental suits entered the prisoner bay, weapons raised. Their movements were practiced, efficient. They'd done this before. "Move out single file," ordered the lead guard, voice distorted through his helmet speaker. "Each of you will receive one supply pack. Basic survival equipment, 7 days of rations. After that, you're on your own." "What about medical supplies?" called out a middle-aged woman with a prosthetic leg. "I need specialized—" "You get what everyone gets," interrupted the guard. "Not my problem what happens after we leave." 50 of us shuffled from the ship into alien daylight. The atmosphere was breathable, according to our pre-landing briefing, but the air held a metallic tang that coated my tongue with a coppery aftertaste. I drew slow, cautious breaths, testing my body's reaction to the foreign environment. No immediate respiratory distress, a small mercy. The landscape stretched before us, rolling hills covered in vegetation that seemed to pulse with internal bioluminescence. Even in daylight, the plants emitted a soft glow that rippled across their surfaces like water. The sky above was a deep amber, sunlight filtering through thick clouds that moved too quickly for natural weather patterns. As we assembled on uneven ground, I noticed the Cerberus had sustained damage during landing, a long gash along its port side where the hull had buckled. Coolant fluid leaked from the wound, sizzling as it hit the alien soil. The guards worked efficiently, distributing supply packs from a cargo hold while keeping us covered. Their nervous glances at the surrounding landscape betrayed that even they found this place unsettling. The commander, distinguished by red stripes on his environment suit, addressed us briefly. "By order of the Interplanetary Coalition, you have been sentenced to permanent exile on designated planetoid RX 437. There are no scheduled retrievals. Attempting to interfere with this vessel's departure is punishable by immediate execution." He paused, then added, more quietly, "The planet has a 30-hour day cycle. Night temperatures drop below freezing. Indigenous life forms are unstudied. Good luck." That last part wasn't in the script. Perhaps even he felt a twinge of conscience about our fate. Within 20 minutes, the guards retreated to their ship. The engines roared to life, kicking up dust and debris that forced us to shield our eyes. The Cerberus rose unsteadily, the damaged section clearly hampering its performance, but it climbed higher until it was merely a speck against the alien sky. Then it was gone, and we were alone. Chaos erupted immediately. Some prisoners fell to their knees in despair. Others began shouting, arguing over what to do next. A burly man with a facial tattoo tried to claim multiple supply packs, resulting in the first of many fights. I watched as he slammed his fist into the jaw of a younger man who'd protested the theft. No one intervened. It was our new reality. No laws, no civilization, just the brutal simplicity of survival. I felt a touch on my arm. Eliza Vaughan stood beside me, her supply pack already secured on her back. Her expression was composed, analytical, professional. "We need to move," she said quietly. "Find water, shelter, away from this mess." I nodded, understanding the wisdom in separating ourselves from the larger group. Already smaller factions were forming, alliances based on pre-existing relationships or simple desperation. I recognize a few others who might think rationally, I said, scanning the crowd. "Should we recruit?" Eliza considered this, then gave a slight nod. Carefully. "Too many people means too many competing interests, but too few means we're vulnerable." She adjusted her pack. "I was stationed on Titan for 3 years. Hostile environment protocols become second nature. We approached potential allies with caution, evaluating each for what they might contribute to survival. The first to join us was Tomas Reyes, an engineer convicted of industrial espionage. His practical skills would be invaluable for creating shelter and tools. Dark-haired and compact, He had the calloused hands of someone who'd worked with machinery all his life. "I didn't do what they claim," he told us as we collected water purification tablets from his pack to add to our shared resources. "Competitor framed me to eliminate their strongest rival." "Save the innocent stories," Eliza replied, not unkindly. "Guilty or innocent doesn't matter anymore. Only survival matters." Next came Dax Wayland, a former colonial security officer found guilty of excessive force during a mining colony riot. His tactical knowledge and combat training made him an obvious asset, though his intense demeanour and watchful eyes suggested he might be dangerous under the wrong circumstances. Still, we needed protection. "I'll keep watch while we travel," he offered, scanning the horizon with professional scrutiny. "Something about this place feels predatory." Lena Ortiz joined us after breaking away from a larger group that had begun fighting over leadership. A botanist imprisoned for illegal genetic modification of food crops, she carried herself with quiet dignity that belied her situation. "Those plants aren't behaving like plants should," she observed, pointing to a cluster of fern-like growth that seemed to track our movement. "They're responsive to stimuli in ways that suggest neural pathways." Our final recruit was Kai Levinson, a pilot whose smuggling operation had been discovered after a decade of success. His weathered face suggested years of hard living, but his eyes remained alert and intelligent. "I've survived worse than this," he claimed, though I doubted that was true. "The key is to keep moving until you find your advantage." By nightfall, which came suddenly, the amber sky transitioning to inky blackness within minutes, our group consisted of 6 people. We made camp 3 kilometers from the landing site, near an outcropping of glossy black stone that provided some shelter from the wind that had picked up as darkness fell. Using debris from our supply containers, we constructed a rudimentary windbreak and established a small perimeter. The temperature plummeted, just as the commander had warned. Our breath formed clouds in the frigid air as we huddled around the small portable heater included in our supplies. Its power cell would last perhaps 2 days at maximum output. After that, we'd need to find alternative heat sources. "No stars," Kai noted, looking up at the night sky. "Not a single one." He was right. The darkness above us was absolute, not the blanket of stars that should be visible from any planetary surface. Just nothing. An empty void that seemed to swallow light rather than merely lacking it. "Could be the cloud cover," Thomas suggested, but his voice betrayed doubt. "It's not clouds," Eliza said quietly. "Look how clear the air is now. We should see something." The darkness wasn't the only disquieting element. As night deepened, sounds emerged from the wilderness surrounding our camp. Clicking noises, low humming, occasional bursts of what might have been distant howls. The glowing vegetation dimmed, but didn't extinguish completely, creating pools of eerie blue-green light across the landscape. "We'll take watches," Dax suggested, falling back on security protocols. 2-hour shifts, pairs at a time. I don't want anyone alone if something approaches. We agreed on a rotation schedule. I was paired with Lena for the middle watch, which meant I could get a few hours of rest first. Sleep came fitfully for me, even when off watch. The ground beneath my makeshift bedroll pulsed with subtle vibration, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. When I closed my eyes, after images danced across my vision. Strange symbols I couldn't recall seeing, but somehow recognized. When my shift came, I sat with Lena at the edge of our camp, the small portable heater creating a bubble of warmth against the surprisingly cold night. Our breath fogged in the chill air as we scanned the darkness beyond our perimeter. "The plants here are like nothing I've studied," she whispered, gesturing to the vegetation visible in the glow of our lamp. "They respond to sound. Watch." She clicked her tongue softly, and nearby frond-like growth swayed toward us, despite the lack of wind. When she repeated the sound, they bent further in our direction, their glow intensifying slightly. "Do you think they're dangerous?" I asked, fighting the urge to back away from the reaching tendrils. Lena shrugged. "Everything here is dangerous until proven otherwise, but they seem more curious than predatory, like children reaching for something shiny." "Children can be cruel," I murmured. "True enough." She adjusted her position, wincing slightly. "My back's killing me. These supply packs were designed by someone who's never had to carry one." The conversation lapsed into silence. We watched the darkness, listening to the strange sounds that echoed across the alien landscape. Occasionally the perimeter sensor would chime softly, but investigation revealed only native flora moving in patterns that triggered the motion detection. "What did you do before?" I asked eventually. "You mentioned genetic modification." Lena's expression hardened slightly. "I was trying to develop drought-resistant rice variants for colony worlds with unstable climate patterns. The company I worked for wanted to patent the genes and charge starving colonies for the privilege. I disagreed with their approach and tried to release my research publicly." She smiled without humor. "They don't appreciate that kind of initiative." "Corporate ethics at their finest," I replied. "What about you? Xenobiology, right? What got you sent here?" I gave her the abbreviated version of my story, the lab accident, the doctored footage, the hasty trial. She listened without interruption, her focus divided between my words and our surroundings. "Convenient timing," she noted when I finished. "Was your research valuable?" "Potentially. I was working on adaptability markers, genetic sequences that allow organisms to rapidly adjust to extreme environmental changes. The applications for colonial terraforming would be significant." "Valuable enough to eliminate competition?" The question hung in the air between us. I'd considered this possibility during my incarceration, but had never found concrete evidence. "Maybe," I admitted. "But why frame me, rather than just fire me, or reassign me to a dead-end project?" "Sometimes examples need to be made," Lena replied grimly. "Fear keeps the other researchers in line." The remainder of our watch passed without incident. As I tried to sleep again afterward, Lena's question echoed in my mind. Had I been sent here deliberately? And if so, why this planet specifically? Morning arrived with the same abruptness as night had fallen. One moment darkness surrounded us, the next a flood of amber light washed across the landscape. With daylight came the first real opportunity to assess our surroundings. We were in a valley of sorts, with gently sloping hills rising in 3 directions. The fourth opened to what appeared to be a denser collection of the pulsing vegetation. Not quite a forest, but something similar. The black stone formation that had sheltered us continued in a rough line toward one of the hillsides, like the spine of some enormous buried creature. "We need water," Dak stated the obvious as we gathered for a morning meal of preserved protein from our rations, "and better shelter than this." "And food," added Kai. 7 days of rations won't last long. We need to find something edible, or we're dead within a week." After breakfast, we decided to split into 3 pairs to explore our immediate surroundings, agreeing to reconvene at midday. Eliza and I headed toward the densest vegetation, hypothesizing that plant life might indicate a water source. As we walked, I noticed unusual rock formations scattered across the landscape. Glossy black, like our shelter, but shaped in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Geometric patterns too regular to be natural erosion. One resembled a perfect cube balanced on its corner, another a series of concentric rings rising from the ground like ripples, frozen in time. "Do you think someone lived here before?" I asked, pausing to examine one such formation, a column of interlocking hexagonal segments rising about 2 meters from the ground. Eliza ran her hand along the smooth surface. "Maybe not lived, but visited. These don't feel like natural formations." The column felt slightly warm beneath my fingers, despite the cool morning air. The surface was smoother than it appeared, almost frictionless, like polished obsidian, but with a subtle give that reminded me of living tissue. When I stepped away to continue walking, a strange sensation made me glance back at it. For a moment I could swear the column had shifted position, rotating slightly on its axis, though it hadn't moved from its spot. I blinked, and it appeared as it had before. "Did you see?" I began, but Eliza's excited voice cut me off. "Adrian, over here!" She stood about 20 meters ahead, at the edge of the denser vegetation. As I joined her, I saw what had caught her attention, a narrow stream of water cutting through the landscape, its surface faintly luminescent with the same purple-green hue we'd observed from orbit. "Is it safe?" I wondered, kneeling beside it. The water flowed with unusual viscosity, slightly thicker than Earth-standard water, with a subtle iridescence that shifted as it moved. "Only one way to find out," Eliza replied, removing a testing strip from her pack. Standard emergency supplies included basic water purification and testing equipment. She dipped the strip into the flowing water, then checked the color change against the reference chart. "Basic chemical composition seems Earth standard," she said, surprised. "Slightly higher mineral content, but nothing immediately toxic. Oxygen saturation normal, no obvious biological contaminants." "That seems convenient," I muttered, suspicious of anything that appeared too accommodating on this alien world. "Don't look a gift horse in the mouth," she replied, filling one of her water containers as evidence. "We'll run more tests back at camp, but finding potable water this quickly is a win." Our exploration continued along the stream, noting the increasing density and variety of plant life as we proceeded. Some specimens resembled ferns with translucent leaves that revealed complex circulatory systems within. Others grew in spiral patterns from the ground, unfurling in perfect geometric progressions. One particularly striking variety resembled coral formations, but swayed in response to our footsteps despite the lack of wind or water current. "The biodiversity here is remarkable," I noted, careful not to touch anything despite my scientific curiosity. "These species have evolved without any connection to Earth's evolutionary tree, yet some show familiar patterns." "Convergent evolution," Eliza suggested. "Similar environmental pressures create similar adaptations, even across completely separate biospheres." "Perhaps," I agreed, though something about the flora's organization bothered me. There was a pattern to the distribution, not random as natural ecosystems typically appeared, but arranged with a deliberateness that suggested cultivation. We collected samples where it seemed safe to do so, using the specimen containers from our emergency kits. Lena would be able to analyze them more thoroughly with her botanical expertise. When we returned to camp, the others had similar reports of valuable discoveries. Tomas and Lena had found an area where the blackstone formations created natural cavern-like spaces, potentially suitable for more permanent shelter. The cave system extended deeper than they dared explore on a first expedition, but the entrance chambers were dry and offered protection from the elements. Dax and Kai had scouted the surrounding hills, gaining better visibility of the broader landscape, including what might be more substantial ruins several kilometers distant, structures that appeared artificial rather than natural formations. "There's something else," Dax said, his expression grim. "We found Jessup." Jessup had been part of the original landing party, a quiet man who'd wandered off alone despite warnings. He'd been a finance specialist convicted of embezzlement, ill-suited for survival situations. "Is he alive?" I asked, noting the past tense in Dax's statement. "Yes," Dax replied, "but not right." They'd found him wandering on the hillside, disoriented and injured. His clothes were torn and covered in a substance that resembled dried blood, but had an iridescent quality when caught in the light. Most disturbing were his eyes, or rather, the empty sockets where his eyes had been. No blood, just smooth sealed tissue, as if the organs had never existed. They wanted to see through me, he kept repeating when questioned. They needed windows. Despite our limited medical supplies, we did what we could for him. Jessup accepted water but refused food, his body trembling continuously. When asked about what had happened, he could only repeat variations of the same disturbing phrase. His hands made strange, precise gestures as he spoke, almost like sign language, but following patterns none of us recognized. We established a more permanent settlement near the water source, close to the natural stone shelters Tomas and Lena had discovered. The first week passed in a blur of activity, expanding our living space, testing local flora and fauna for edibility, establishing perimeter alerts using motion sensors from our supply packs. Jessup died 3 days after being found. He simply stopped breathing in his sleep, his body growing cold with unnatural speed. When Dax and I examined him afterwards, we discovered crystalline growths along his spine, clear formations that resembled salt deposits but had an internal structure that pulsed weakly for hours after his death before finally going dark. We buried him beneath one of the stone formations, marking the grave with a cairn of smaller rocks. No one knew what religious beliefs he might have held, so Kai offered a generic eulogy that emphasized the universal return to the elements. It felt inadequate, but it was all we could offer. He was only the first. As weeks stretched into a month, our colony of exiles developed a rhythm. The majority of the original prisoners had formed a larger settlement about a day's walk from our position, but we maintained minimal contact. Reports from those who travelled between camps brought news of violence, power struggles, and dwindling supplies. Their leader, a former military officer named Vega, had established a crude autocracy based on control of remaining ration packs. Our smaller group fared better. Lena's botanical knowledge proved invaluable as she catalogued edible plant species. The translucent fern-like growths contained starches similar to potatoes, while a bulbous yellow fungus provided protein when properly prepared. Some contained mild psychoactive compounds that she carefully documented and warned against. "This one induces vivid hallucinations," she explained, pointing to a spiral-shaped growth with blue phosphorescent spots, but the after effects include dangerous respiratory depression. Thomas's engineering skills helped us develop more sophisticated shelter systems, and even primitive tools using materials at hand. He fashioned cutting implements from the glossy black stone, which held an edge better than metal when properly shaped. His greatest accomplishment was a filtration system for the stream water, removing the faint metallic taste that lingered even after purification. Kai's experience in navigating hostile territories helped us map the surrounding 5-kilometer radius. He established landmarks and safe routes between resource points, marking them with patterns of stones that only our group would recognize. Dax maintained security, establishing patrol routes and training everyone in basic defensive tactics. "We don't know what's out there," he reminded us daily, "but it knows we're here." But RX-437 was revealing its secrets slowly, and each discovery brought new unease. The strange rock formations appeared to change position when not directly observed. Multiple group members reported the phenomenon independently. We began marking their positions, confirming that shifts of several centimeters occurred daily, always when no one was watching, never while under direct observation. Electronic devices from our supply packs occasionally activated without user input. Tomas's communication device, though designed only for short-range transmissions between packs, sometimes emitted bursts of sound, fragments of transmissions in languages none of us recognized. The first time it happened, we gathered around as static-filled voices spoke, in rhythmic patterns that almost resembled speech, but followed no linguistic structure any of us could identify. "Could be interference from the larger camp," Tomas suggested, but when we tried to establish communication with them, we received no response on the same frequency. The pattern of day and night began to seem arbitrary, transitions occurring at irregular intervals rather than following the 30-hour cycle the commander had mentioned. Sometimes daylight lasted what felt like 40 hours. Other times darkness fell after what couldn't have been more than 15. And the feeling of being watched intensified. We all experienced it, the prickling sensation at the back of the neck, the certainty that eyes were following our movements from just beyond the range of vision. At night, shadows seemed deeper than they should be, moving independently of their light sources. It was during the 4th week that everything changed. Dax and I were on perimeter patrol when we discovered unusual tracks surrounding our camp. Narrow impressions in the soil, arranged in patterns that suggested a biped, but with a stride length and foot structure unlike anything human. Could be from the larger camp, Dax suggested without conviction as he knelt to examine the markings more closely. I knelt to examine the impressions more closely. These weren't made by human feet. Look at the distribution of weight. Forward heavy, with what appear to be only 3 or 4 digits, and the stride length is nearly 2 meters. Dax ran his hand above the tracks without touching them. Whatever made these was following our patrol route. See how they mirror our established path. It was studying our patterns. We alerted the others immediately, implementing enhanced security measures. Additional motion sensors were placed at varying distances from camp. We established a buddy system. No one would be alone at any time, even within the camp perimeter. That night, Kai was first to spot them during his watch, shadowy figures lingering at the edge of our light sources. When he called for others to look, they retreated from view, melting into the darkness with unnatural speed. "I'm not imagining things," he insisted at our council meeting the following morning. "They were humanoid, but wrong, too tall, too thin, and they moved like they were gliding. No footfalls, just smooth motion." "We need to make a decision," Thomas said. "Attempt communication or strengthen defenses." The debate grew heated. Dax and Kai advocated for enhanced security measures, arguing that anything observing us covertly should be considered hostile until proven otherwise. Lena suggested peaceful contact attempts, noting that curiosity didn't necessarily indicate aggressive intent. "We're the invaders here," she reminded us. "They have more reason to fear us than we do them." Eliza remained strangely quiet throughout the discussion, her attention seemingly elsewhere. When I asked her opinion, she blinked slowly as if returning from deep thought. "They've been watching since we landed," she said simply. "We should acknowledge them." That night she disappeared during her guard shift. Morning revealed no sign of struggle, no indication of where she had gone. Her pack remained in her sleeping area, but her notebook was missing. The sensor log showed nothing crossing the perimeter where she'd been stationed. One moment her life signs were present, the next they vanished. We organised search parties, combing the surrounding area in widening circles. The mood was tense, every shadow and sound a potential threat. Dax insisted on arming everyone with makeshift weapons, spears fashioned from the cutting tools Thomas had created. Lena found it, Eliza's notebook, lying open on one of the black stone formations, a half-kilometre from camp. The last several pages contained increasingly erratic writing, diagrams, and references to dimensional overlap and perception filters. The neat, precise handwriting of a scientist had deteriorated into cramped scrawls that sometimes overlapped, as if she'd been writing in darkness or tremendous haste. One page held a drawing of humanoid figures, with proportions similar to what Kai had described. Elongated limbs, narrow torsos, heads that seemed too large for their bodies. Beside it, Eliza had written, "They exist between moments. We can only see them when they choose to be seen." The final entry read simply, "They've been here all along. We just couldn't see properly." Days passed with no sign of Eliza. We maintained search efforts while strengthening our camp defences, constructing a perimeter wall. using available materials and establishing more regular patrol schedules. Tensions ran high, with minor arguments erupting over resource allocation and security protocols. Lena began analysing the local flora more intensively, searching for anything that might enhance our perceptual abilities. If Eliza was right about perception filters, she explained, certain compounds might help us see what she saw. Thomas focused on modifying our communication devices, attempting to capture the strange transmissions more clearly. He worked ceaselessly, his fingers constantly adjusting components, his expression increasingly frustrated, as each attempt yielded only fragments. It was during one of my perimeter patrols that I first saw them clearly, the native entities Kai had glimpsed, standing at the edge of the stream, partially obscured by the pulsing vegetation, was a figure that defied conventional description. Tall and gaunt, its proportions suggested a humanoid framework, but the details blurred and shifted, as if rejecting definitive form. Light seemed to bend around its edges, creating a visual distortion that hurt my eyes to focus upon. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. The entity made no aggressive movement, simply observing me with what I sensed rather than saw were eyes, points of deeper darkness within its shifting form. For several long moments, we regarded each other across the narrow water barrier. When I finally managed to raise my hand in what I hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful greeting, the figure tilted what approximated a head. Then, with a motion like rippling water, it retreated into the vegetation and vanished. I remained motionless, scanning for any sign of its return. Nothing moved except the gently pulsing plants. Eventually I continued my patrol route, every sense hyper-aware, the encounter replaying in my mind. Back at camp I discovered I wasn't alone in such experiences. Lena had seen something similar while collecting plant samples. Tomas reported unusual shadows moving against the direction of the light source. Our isolation had been an illusion. We'd been under observation since arrival. Dreams became another battlefield. Several colonists, myself included, experienced vivid nightmares where communication occurred with the entities. In mine, I stood in a vast chamber of shifting black stone, while a voice that felt like vibration rather than sound explained concepts my waking mind couldn't retain. I would wake with fragments of understanding, ideas about the nature of reality that seemed profound in the moment but slipped away like water through fingers as consciousness fully returned. One concept persisted. The entities existed in a slightly different phase of reality than ourselves. Not quite dimensional displacement, but a perceptual offset that made them typically invisible to human senses. I awoke from one such dream with a compelling certainty. Certain sound frequencies repelled the entities. Without fully understanding why, I constructed a rudimentary device using components from our emergency beacons that emitted a low humming tone. When activated, near the perimeter, where sightings occurred most frequently, the shadowy figures retreated more quickly. It disrupts their phase alignment, I tried to explain to the others, though I wasn't entirely sure what I meant. The vibration pattern interferes with whatever allows them to partially manifest in our perceptual range. "Where did you learn this?" Dax asked suspiciously. I hesitated. "I dreamed it." His expression darkened. "You're taking action based on dreams now? Like Eliza before she vanished?" "The dreams aren't random," Lena interjected. "I've been experiencing them too. They're structured, consistent, more like information transfer than subconscious processing." "They're in our heads," Kai said flatly. "That's not comforting." "Why were we sent here?" he asked one evening as we sat around our heating unit. The night was particularly cold, our breath visible in the chill air. Of all the uninhabited planets they could dump prisoners on, why choose one with whatever these things are? "Maybe they didn't know," Lena suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. They knew, Dax countered. This planet was chosen for a reason. Think about it, no routine check-ins, no monitoring beacons. They dropped us here and ran. I thought of the doctored security footage, my rushed trial, the convenient timing of the lab accident. Connections formed in my mind. A pattern emerging from seemingly unrelated events. What if we're not prisoners? I said slowly. What if we're experiments? The implications hung heavy in the air between us. No one spoke for several long moments, each contemplating the possibility that our exile had more sinister purpose than mere punishment. If that's true, Thomas finally said, then someone is watching us, monitoring our interactions with this environment. Or collecting our corpses when we fail, Kai added grimly. My background in xenobiology prompted me to develop a system for attempted communication. Using patterns of light from our emergency beacons, I established a basic signal system near the stream where I'd had my clearest sighting. The pattern was simple, based on prime numbers, which I hoped might be recognizable to any intelligence, regardless of cultural context. For 3 days, nothing responded to my patterns. I maintained my vigil despite Dax's concerns about exposing myself to potential danger. On the 4th day, as dusk approached, one of the entities emerged from the vegetation and approached the boundary I'd established. Its form seemed more stable than in previous sightings, though still difficult to focus upon directly. I initiated the simplest pattern, 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, universal across human colonies as a non-threatening contact signal. After a moment's hesitation, the entity raised what might have been a limb. From it emanated a soft glow that pulsed in response. 3 times, pause 3 times. My heart raced. Contact. Over subsequent attempts, I established rudimentary communication, using increasingly complex light patterns. Concepts required multiple exchanges to convey, but gradually understanding emerged. The breakthrough came when I managed to convey our most pressing questions. Who are you? What is this place? The response, interpreted through our pattern system, identified them as the Displaced, and revealed that they considered humans to be invasive presences in their realm. They had existed on RX-437 for what our time frame would interpret as millennia, though their perception of time differed fundamentally from ours. Most concerning was the revelation that multiple species of entities inhabited different layers of the planet, the Displaced being only one group, apparently more amenable to human contact than others. They warned of deeper presences, ancient intelligences that slumbered beneath the surface but were stirring due to our arrival. I reported my findings to the others, who received the information with mixed reactions. Dax remained skeptical, questioning how I could be certain of my interpretations. Lena and Thomas showed cautious interest, while Kai maintained his pragmatic focus on immediate survival concerns. If they're so advanced, why haven't they just eliminated us? Dax challenged. I think they're curious, I replied. We represent something new, a form of life they haven't encountered before. Or they're playing with their food, Kai muttered. As communication progressed, I noticed troubling changes in some colonists who had experienced direct contact. Thomas began experiencing fugue states, staring blankly for hours before resuming activity with no memory of lost time. Lena reported seeing colours beyond the normal visual spectrum, describing them in increasingly abstract terms that the rest of us struggled to comprehend. It's like the space between green and blue, but deeper, she tried to explain after one encounter. A colour that feels like sinking. The changes accelerated after an exploration team discovered ancient structures half buried in a distant valley. The ruins suggested civilization far beyond human technological development. Curved archways of the same black stone material that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Surfaces etched with symbols that changed appearance, depending on viewing angle. Dax led the initial expedition, returning with descriptions that prompted a larger exploration party. 6 of us ventured to the site, leaving only minimal security at our base camp. The journey took most of a day following the winding path of the stream before ascending into steeper terrain. The ruins revealed themselves gradually, first as geometric anomalies on the landscape, then as deliberate constructions partially reclaimed by the native vegetation. A series of concentric circular platforms led to what might have been a central temple or observatory. Doorways opened to underground chambers, their depths lost in shadow despite our portable lighting. "This architecture isn't just alien," Tomas observed as we examined the main structure. "It's impossible." He ran his hand along a curve that appeared to bend in ways that violated normal spatial geometry. "This angle should collapse under its own structural contradictions, but it's perfectly stable." "The material feels familiar," Lena noted, touching one of the obsidian-like walls. "Like the stone formations near our camp, but more refined." We split into pairs to explore different sections, maintaining communication via our devices. Kai and I descended into one of the underground chambers, our lights barely penetrating the unusual darkness that seemed almost viscous in its density. The passageway narrowed, then opened into a vast circular room. Our lights couldn't reach the ceiling, creating the disorienting impression of standing beneath an infinite void. At the chamber's center stood a pedestal holding a device unlike anything in human technology, a crystalline structure supported by black stone tendrils, pulsing with internal light in patterns that matched the strange transmissions we picked up on our communication equipment. "Don't touch it," Kai warned as I moved closer. "I won't," I assured him, though I felt an almost magnetic pull toward the object. Instead, I circled it slowly, documenting what I observed. The crystal seemed to respond to my presence, its internal light patterns shifting to track my movement. As I completed my circuit of the pedestal, my foot accidentally scuffed a raised section of the floor. A soft tone emanated from the crystal, and suddenly the darkness above us filled with light. We both gasped as a 3-dimensional map of the star system materialized in the air, stars and planets floating in precise astronomical arrangement. The display rotated slowly, showing familiar celestial bodies, but RX 437 itself was absent from its expected position. "That's impossible," Kai whispered, staring at the gap where our prison planet should be. "We're standing on it right now." The map continued its rotation, then zoomed outward to show a broader view of the galaxy. Lines of energy connected certain systems, forming a network that resembled neural pathways. One such line passed through the empty space where RX 437 should have been, then split into multiple branches that extended toward distant star clusters. "It's a transit map," I realized. "These aren't stars, they're nodes in some kind of network." Before we could investigate further, Tomas's panicked voice came through our communicators. "Everyone back to the entrance now. Something's coming." We hurried back through the passageway, the map collapsing behind us as we left the chamber. At the surface, we found the others already gathered, faces pale with urgency. "Movement all around the perimeter," Dax reported, weapon ready. "Not the displaced, something else." The air had changed, growing thicker with an invisible pressure that made breathing difficult. The ambient light dimmed despite the time of day, shadows stretching unnaturally across the ruins. "Back to camp," Dax ordered. "Tight formation. Move." We retreated from the ruins, maintaining vigilant watch in all directions. No entities revealed themselves, but the sensation of pursuit grew stronger with each step. Halfway back to our settlement, Finn Atwell, a member of the exploration team, who joined us from the larger camp, began acting strangely, stopping to stare into the distance at nothing we could perceive. "We need to wait," he insisted. "They want to talk to us." When Dax tried to urge him forward, Finn became agitated. "You don't understand. They're already inside us. They've been here all along." He broke away suddenly, running perpendicular to our path toward a cluster of black stone formations. We called after him, but he didn't respond, disappearing among the alien structures. "We can't leave him," Lena argued. "We can't stay here either," Dax countered. "Whatever's coming is getting closer." After a brief debate, I volunteered to go with Lena to find Finn, while the others continued toward camp, at a slower pace. We would catch up once we'd retrieved him. We tracked Finn's footprints to the stone formations, but they ended abruptly, as if he'd simply vanished mid-stride. Only his left boot remained in the centre of a small clearing, perfectly upright as though he'd been plucked from it while running. "Adrian," Lena's voice shook slightly. "The stones are moving." I turned to see the black formations slowly rotating, their previously static positions now in fluid motion as they realigned into a perfect circle around us. The ground vibrated beneath our feet, a low humming filling the air. "We need to go," I urged, grabbing her arm. "Now!" We fled the circle just as the stones completed their arrangement. Behind us, light flared from the center of the formation, followed by a sound like reality tearing. We ran without looking back, catching up to the others near the camp perimeter. Everyone was shaken by the experience, but none more than Thomas, who had fallen into one of his fugue states upon our return. He sat motionless by the fire, eyes open but unseeing, occasionally murmuring phrases in what sounded like the Displaced's rhythmic language. When he finally emerged from the state hours later, he had no memory of the episode but reported vivid dreams of subterranean chambers filled with sleeping entities of enormous size and complexity. That afternoon, Eliza Vaughan returned. She appeared at our perimeter as if from nowhere, physically unchanged after weeks of absence but mentally transformed. Her eyes held a distant quality, focusing on points that didn't exist, and her speech patterns had altered, precise and measured where they had once been animated. The clothes she wore were not those she disappeared in, but flowing garments of iridescent material that seemed to shift colour with her movements. "I've been with them," she explained when we questioned her. 30 years in a day. Time moves differently when you understand how to step sideways. We gathered in the main shelter as she shared what she had learned. According to Eliza, RX-437 existed simultaneously in multiple dimensional spaces. The black stone formations were anchor points, places where realities overlapped most strongly. The Displaced were native to a dimensional plane adjacent to our own, trapped here by ancient technology that had created the planet as a crossroads between realities. "This world isn't natural," she explained. "It was constructed, a hub connecting different planes of existence. The builders are long gone, but their technology remains, maintaining the intersections." "Why would anyone build such a thing?" Lena asked. "Travel," Eliza replied simply. "Instantaneous movement between distant points in space by stepping sideways through dimensions rather than traversing linear distance." Most alarming was her warning about another entity species, one that had been drawn to human presence like predators to bait. "They hunt the Displaced," she explained, "but they find us fascinating, collectible. They're called many names, but the Displaced know them as Voidfeeders." According to Eliza, the Voidfeeders existed in a dimensional phase that made them invisible to human perception unless they chose to reveal themselves. They fed on consciousness itself, draining sentient beings of awareness and leaving empty husks behind. "Jessup," I realized. "They took his eyes because—" "Eyes are windows to consciousness," Eliza finished. "The most direct access point." "How do we fight something we can't even see?" Kai demanded. Eliza's expression remained eerily calm. "The Displaced have been fighting them for millennia. They have methods, but first we need to understand what's really happening here." She revealed that her disappearance had been voluntary. She had recognized patterns in the environment that the rest of us had missed, and followed them to make direct contact with the Displaced. They had taken her to what she described as the other side of the world, not geographically, but dimensionally, where time flowed differently and perception expanded beyond human limitations. "I've seen all of you from their perspective," she told us. "Flickering, temporary things, beautiful in your fragility." The colony fractured upon Eliza's return. Some believed her warnings, others suspected she had been compromised or driven insane by isolation. Arguments escalated to violence. Within days, nearly half our remaining group had departed, either to join the larger settlement or to establish new, smaller camps. Those who remained witnessed the truth of Eliza's warnings firsthand. During a particular vivid sunset, the amber sky bleeding to deep crimson, the confrontation erupted at the edge of our territory. The familiar shifting forms of the displaced faced off against new entities that seemed to devour light itself, massive shadows that moved with predatory purpose. The Voidfeeders. Where the displaced shifted and blurred reality, the Voidfeeders negated it. Plants withered in their proximity. The air itself seemed to thin. Their forms suggested enormous maws that consumed everything: light, matter, possibly reality itself. From our vantage point on the camp perimeter, we watched as the displaced fought with surprising effectiveness, their bodies emanating bursts of the same purple-green energy we'd observed from orbit. The combat moved in patterns that hurt the human eye to follow, geometries that shouldn't exist, movements that contradicted natural laws. But wherever the Voidfeeders passed, they left absence in their wake. Entire sections of landscape simply ceased to exist, replaced by patches of nothingness that reflected neither light nor shadow. "This isn't the first battle," Eliza commented as we watched. "It's been going on since before humans evolved. We just walked into the middle of it." Our settlement suffered its first direct attack 3 days later. During night watch, the darkness itself seemed to deepen at our perimeter before flowing over our barriers like liquid shadow. Sensors failed. Light sources dimmed. Dax was taken first, engulfed in moving darkness that retreated as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving nothing behind, not even a body. More attacks followed. We lost Kai and 3 others who had joined us from the larger settlement. Conventional weapons proved useless against entities that existed partially outside our dimensional reality. The sound emitters I'd developed provided temporary deterrence, but failed during extended exposure. Lena developed a compound from local flora that, when burned, produced smoke that seemed to make the Voidfeeders uncomfortable. Not enough to drive them away completely, but sufficient to reduce the frequency of direct assaults. We encircled the camp with continuously burning braziers, filled with the substance, creating a hazy barrier that offered minimal protection. Surviving colonists realized the bitter truth. We needed help from the displaced if we hoped to survive. I led a diplomatic mission to a location where multiple sightings had occurred, bringing our rudimentary communication system and a desperate plea. Through combined light patterns and sound, we achieved greater understanding. The displaced confirmed our suspicions. Humans had been sent here deliberately by those who knew the planet's true nature. More disturbingly, they revealed that certain human brainwave patterns strengthened dimensional barriers, potentially explaining why prisoners were the chosen subjects. "They've been using us," Tomas realized when I reported back. "Whoever sent us here, they're using our brains as some kind of dimensional stabilizer." "But why?" Lena asked. "What's the purpose?" Eliza, who had remained at camp during the diplomatic mission, offered an explanation that chilled us all. "They're trying to close the doorways, seal off this world from the rest of the network. We're the locks." A reluctant alliance formed between our remaining colonists and the displaced. Through increasingly sophisticated communication, they taught us to perceive their world more clearly. Under their guidance, Lena refined her compound to enhance human perception, allowing brief glimpses of the dimensional layers normally invisible to us. The first time I took the compound, reality fractured before my eyes. The world we had been inhabiting revealed itself as merely the thinnest surface layer of a much deeper construct. Beneath and around us extended structures of impossible complexity, architecture that existed in multiple states simultaneously, living systems that flowed through dimensions like water through a sieve. Most stunning was the revelation of the Displaced themselves. Their true forms were beautiful beyond description, crystalline entities of pure energy, organized in patterns that represented the mathematical perfection of consciousness itself. What we had perceived as tall, shadowy figures was merely the three-dimensional shadow of beings existing primarily in higher dimensions. This is what Eliza experienced, I realized, understanding now how her perspective had been so fundamentally altered. The Displaced led us to deeper information about the ancient builders. Fragments of their technology remained scattered across the planet, not just ruins, but functional systems still maintaining the dimensional intersections after countless millennia. The central hub lay beneath the surface in chambers we had only begun to explore during our expedition to the ruins. Eliza indicated that the information from the Displaced led to discovery of ancient technology in deeper ruins, a device capable of stabilizing the fluctuating dimensional boundaries. According to their knowledge, it could anchor RX-437 to a single reality, potentially saving the human colonists from further Voidfeeder attacks. The device exists in what you would call the heart of the planet, Eliza explained as we planned our expedition. A chamber where all dimensions intersect. The builders called it the Nexus. Reaching it would require travelling through territory heavily patrolled by Voidfeeders, who seemed increasingly agitated by our alliance with the Displaced. Moreover, the device itself presented moral complexities. Using it might save the human colonists but would permanently trap the Displaced in our dimension, or potentially erase them entirely if our reality became dominant. Why would they help us activate something that might destroy them? I asked Eliza privately. Because the alternative is worse, she replied. The Voidfeeders are growing stronger with each consciousness they consume. If they gain control of the Nexus, they could extend their feeding grounds to all connected dimensions, including Earth. The implications were staggering. Our prison planet wasn't just a remote exile location. It was a potential gateway that could endanger human civilization throughout the galaxy. With renewed purpose, we prepared for the expedition. The remaining colonists gathered what weapons and supplies we could muster, while the Displaced taught us techniques to resist Voidfeeder influence. Tomas modified our communication devices to emit frequencies that would help maintain our dimensional phase, reducing the risk of being pulled into the spaces between realities where the Voidfeeders hunted most effectively. As we made final preparations, Eliza revealed another crucial detail. The device required a living nervous system to operate. Unlike modern technology, with its machine interfaces, the ancient builders had created systems that melded consciousness with mechanical function. The device needed a mind to direct its energies, to choose which dimensional reality would become dominant. "I'll do it," Eliza announced during one council meeting. "I'm already connected to their reality. My mind exists partially in their dimension already." "It could kill you," I protested, unwilling to sacrifice yet another colleague to this alien world. "I'm already not entirely alive in your sense," she replied with a sad smile. "Not anymore. When I crossed over, part of me remained there. This is just completion of a process already begun." The plan crystallized. We would activate the device during a specific planetary alignment that the Displaced indicated would maximize effectiveness. Eliza would serve as the interface. The remaining colonists would defend the chamber during the process, which would take approximately 6 hours once initiated. As preparations intensified, I made a discovery that altered my understanding of our situation entirely. in Eliza's quarters hidden beneath her sleeping mat, I found a second notebook, one she had kept. Before her disappearance, its pages were filled with observations and theories about RX-437 that predated our arrival, suggesting knowledge no prisoner should possess. The contents confirmed my worst fears. Nebula Frontier had discovered RX-437's unique properties years earlier. They had been deliberately sending problematic employees here as experimental subjects, observing the results remotely. The sabotage that had killed my colleagues and led to my conviction had been orchestrated by the company itself, not to eliminate competition, but to provide justification for my exile to this testing ground. Most damning was the final page. Coordinates for a location on RX-437, where a company observation post had been established. They had been watching us all along, recording our interactions with the dimensional phenomena for their own purposes. I confronted Eliza with this information hours before the device activation was scheduled. I suspected, she admitted, her expression unreadable in the dim light of our shelter. But confirmation came only after I crossed over. The Displaced showed me echoes of previous human visitors, scientists, observers. Why didn't you tell us? We've been lab rats this entire time. Would it have changed anything? She asked. We're still trapped here. The Voidfeeders are still hunting. This was always about survival, Adrian. And after? If we survive this, we need to expose what the company has done. Eliza nodded slowly. The observation post contains transmission equipment powerful enough to reach the colonies. If you can get there, you can tell the truth. The expedition assembled at dawn, 17 colonists and a contingent of the Displaced, who manifested more fully in our dimension than we had previously witnessed. The journey to the deep ruins would take us through territories where dimensional boundaries were already weakening, making travel hazardous, even without Voidfeeder activity. As we departed, I noticed that the vegetation had begun to lose its bioluminescent properties. Plants that had pulsed with inner light now appeared dull and static. The stream water no longer carried its iridescent sheen. RX-437 itself seemed to be dying as the dimensional conflicts intensified. The activation process began as planned. We reached the central chamber, a vast dome supported by impossible geometries, its walls etched with the same shifting symbols we had observed in the surface ruins. At its center stood a crystal structure larger and more complex than the mapping device we had discovered earlier. Eliza interfaced with the ancient device, her body suspended within the crystal structure as energy flowed around and through her. The chamber hummed with building power, vibrations that resonated at frequencies just at the edge of human hearing. Her eyes closed as filaments of light extended from the crystal to connect with her nervous system. Beautiful and terrifying simultaneously. Reality around the ruins began to stabilize. The constant subtle vibrations that had permeated the planet since our arrival stilled. The shifting black stone formations locked into place. Colors seemed sharper, sounds clearer, as if existence itself was coming into greater focus. The Voidfeeders responded immediately. They converged on the ruins in unprecedented numbers, darkness flowing through cracks and openings despite our defenses. The Displaced fought alongside us, revealing their true form as beings of crackling energy when fully manifested in battle. The chamber became a chaos of light and shadow, solid matter, and void-like absence. 3 more colonists fell to the Voidfeeders. One of the Displaced sacrificed itself to seal a major breach, its energy form dispersing in a flash that temporarily drove back the darkness. 5 hours into the process, Eliza's consciousness began to spread through the ancient network. Her physical body remained in the central chamber, but her presence extended outward, creating a temporary safe zone around the ruins. Her voice echoed from multiple directions simultaneously. "It's working," she announced. "The anchor is stabilizing, but there's something else. Through the network, she had accessed information stored within the ancient system, knowledge of the builders and their ultimate fate. The dimensional network had been created not just for travel, but as a refuge from something that had pursued them across countless light years. The Voidfeeders weren't always predators, her voice explained, words forming directly in our minds rather than through sound. They were transformed by contact with something older, something the builders fled from. The network was meant to be temporary, but they never completed their escape. Her final message contained coordinates, the location of the hidden Nebula Frontier Observation Post, confirming what I had discovered in her notebook. "Get there," her voice urged, as her physical form became increasingly translucent. "Expose them. Make this matter." As the 6th hour approached, the device reached full power. A shockwave of energy pulsed outward from the ruins, temporarily revealing the overlapping dimensions as visual echoes before they collapsed into a single reality. The Voidfeeders shrieked, a sound that existed more as pressure than noise, as they were forced fully into our dimension, suddenly subject to its physical laws. Without their dimensional advantages, they appeared almost pitiful, withered, skeletal creatures with too many limbs and sensory organs that evolved for environments nothing like our own. Exposed to full materiality, they began to deteriorate, their forms breaking down like smoke dissipating in wind. The Displaced similarly solidified, their forms stabilizing into tall, luminescent beings with distinct features for the first time: compound eyes, exoskeletal structures, limbs that branched into delicate manipulators. They regarded us with what might have been gratitude, though their expressions remained fundamentally alien. In the aftermath, I led the remaining survivors, only 11 of us now, toward the coordinates Eliza had provided. We travelled for 3 days, across terrain that seemed subtly altered, more stable but somehow less alive than before. The pulsing vegetation had gone dormant. The sky had settled into a constant amber hue, without the strange flashes we had observed upon arrival. The observation post was disguised as a natural formation, but once we knew what to look for, the artificial elements became obvious. Hidden panels, camouflage sensors, a door mechanism integrated into the blackstone. They built it to blend with the environment, Thomas observed as we approached cautiously. They didn't want the Displaced to discover it. Inside, we discovered the truth. The facility was small but sophisticated. A monitoring station with sensors deployed across the planet's surface. Logs confirmed the company's knowledge and deliberate use of RX-437 as a testing ground. They had been observing dimensional phenomena for years, using human subjects to gather data on interdimensional physics and potential applications for energy generation and weapons development. Most of the equipment was still functional. Using emergency protocols, I transmitted evidence of company crimes to multiple off-world colonies, bypassing normal communication channels. The files included research notes, subject tracking data, and video logs of previous experiments, prisoners who had suffered fates similar to ours, their struggles and deaths recorded with clinical detachment. "This goes beyond corporate espionage," Lena said as she reviewed the files. They were trying to weaponize dimensional technology. The ability to phase matter between realities could render conventional defenses useless. As the transmission completed, the facility began to destabilize. The dimensional anchoring had unexpected consequences. Areas with artificial technology were becoming increasingly unstable as realities settled. Consoles sparked, support beams groaned. A fissure opened in one wall, revealing the black stone beneath the synthetic covering. We activated the emergency beacon and prepared the facility's escape pod, designed for research staff evacuation, as walls began to warp and collapse. It was small, intended for perhaps 6 people at most, but we would make it work for our 11 survivors. It was then that Tomas revealed himself. He had been a company operative all along, planted among the prisoners to monitor the experiment from within. As the others prepared the escape pod, he cornered me in the communications room. "You're ruining years of research," he snarled, a neurodisruptor weapon appearing in his hand, technology far more advanced than our makeshift tools. The dimensional technology could revolutionize humanity's future. "At what cost?" I demanded. "How many more people would you sacrifice?" "As many as necessary," he replied coldly. "Progress requires sacrifice. The company understood that." In the chaos of evacuation, he attempted to destroy the transmission evidence and prevent our escape. The struggle was brief but violent. Tomas's enhanced strength, a product of company modification, nearly overcame me until one of the displaced who had accompanied us intervened, immobilizing him with a burst of energy. 7 of us managed to board the escape pod before the facility collapsed entirely. Tomas and 3 others were lost in the destruction, along with the displaced who had helped us. The launch was violent, sending us hurtling into orbit around RX-437 as dimensional stabilization continued to ripple across the planet's surface. From space, we witnessed the final transformation. The planet's strange atmospheric effects calmed, the purple-green energy dissipating as the dimensional anchoring completed. RX-437 became solid, definite, a single reality, rather than many overlapping ones. For 6 days, we drifted, life support systems gradually failing, until an independent salvage vessel detected our emergency beacon and altered course to investigate. The captain, a grizzled veteran of the outer colonies, was skeptical of our story until she reviewed the transmission data we carried. "I've heard rumours about Nebula Frontier," she admitted, as a medical officer treated our various injuries. "Black sites, employees disappearing. Never thought it went this deep." The evidence we carried caused an interplanetary scandal upon our return to civilized space. Nebula Frontier's stock collapsed. Executives faced criminal charges. Survivors of RX-437 received reparations and pardons for the false crimes that had sent us into exile. But returning to normal life proved impossible. Those of us who experienced the dimensional overlap suffered lasting effects, perception shifts, occasional time slips where moments stretched or compressed unpredictably. Medical experts labelled it dimensional adjustment disorder, but treatments proved minimally effective. In quiet moments, I still see echoes of the displaced, flowing forms at the edge of vision, gone when I turn to look directly. The boundaries between realities may have been strengthened, but our exposure left permanent changes in our perceptual frameworks. I established a research foundation using my settlement funds dedicated to understanding what had happened on RX-437 and monitoring for similar phenomena elsewhere. The planet itself was quarantined by international agreement, with automated beacons warning ships to avoid its entire star system, but I suspect the quarantine came too late. In quiet moments, I find myself wondering if we truly escaped. Sometimes my shadow moves independently of my body, shifting when it should be still. Objects in my peripheral vision change position when I'm not looking directly at them. Dreams bring messages in that familiar vibration voice. Most disturbing is the growing certainty that our experience opened something that cannot be closed. The dimensional breach goes both ways. What we brought back may be subtle, fragments of other realities embedded within our own, but I fear it's spreading. The Displaced warned us in those final hours, reality is permeable. Once breached, the barriers weaken permanently. Earth itself may now be vulnerable to what waits between dimensions, and in the deepest darkness of night, when I wake to that familiar sensation of being watched, I know with terrible certainty, we're not alone here either.